many of you may be aware of this, but I just want to make sure that people know that this whole notion of calling an evening a contra dance is a really new phenomenon. It wasn't till the mid-1970s that the first, in the Boston area, that there was a flyer for what was billed as a contra dance, a whole evening. So this is in the span of human history, and certainly of this kind of dance history, this notion of dividing it up and specifying a contra dance. And of course, as we've seen, the programs have gotten narrower and narrower. We've all been in halls where the caller will say, you know, find a partner and 3 other couples and line up for a square, and you hear the boos ring out from people who want a contra dance.
Back when I first got into this business, my hearing said, going to square dance tonight, period. And that's what it was called. No matter what you did, do you going to square dance tonight? And this went on and on and on for years and years and years. And I cannot tell you when it stopped being called a square dance. But this is in my area, my locale, New Boston, New Hampshire, and Francistown, and so on and so on. But it was always known as a square dance, period. And you did contras there as well as squares, but it mostly was squares, and most of the time it was just called, and finally, these days, now it's not called a square dance at all, except for this nice man here. And so anyway, that's my story.
When we started dancing in New York, we were having a difficult time trying to name it because we were trying to call it country dancing. So to distinguish it from square dancing, and because we were also using some English dances when we were doing the dances. So we called it country dancing as long as we could, and then contra became the key word for a dance in New York and in New England, apparently. And it's a shame to me that people who come to these dances are only willing to contra dance, because there are so many beautiful other dances that a caller would call. And to me, dancing is about having a good time and enjoying yourself and sharing the time with your partner and other people who enjoy dancing. And the last part, the complaining, the nitpicking, and the rest of it is very destructive to the dance and to the caller. And we've gone through 10-year periods, I think, because I started calling in 72 or 3. I think we've gone through periods where every 10 years people start arguing about whether or not the caller knows what they're doing.
Right.
And a lot of the young callers who are now trying to call probably are scared to death when they get up there in front of everybody, and they have their notes, they have their book, they have their cards, and they have their ideas on what their dance should be like. And the first thing that happens sometime is some dancer comes up and says, "You're doing that wrong."
We don't do it that way in Boston.
And we don't do it that way. I think that dancers owe it to their bands and their callers to be respectful